Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly podcast show. I'm Councillor Premier with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this section, we're going to discuss further questions for Tower Hamlets Council in regards to the Afsana Begum trial and acquittal. So a few caveats. I'm going to come with my caveat first and then Andrew with his, because there's been some correspondences with the legal department at Tower Hamlets Council, and I've also been tagged on social media in regards to certain things. So my caveat is, as my day job, I work in the civil service, in the court service. So our position is we're professional, we're neutral arbitrators. We are not expected to discuss any outcomes in regards to any judgments. Our role as civil servants is to support the judiciary in their matter. Hence, I have not discussed the outcome, but I have raised a local government questions in regards to the trial and acquittal as my role as a Tower Hamlets councillor, and that's the fine line I'm expected to walk in terms of instructions from my managers. But over to you, Andrew. You've had also correspondences from Tower Hamlets legal department, so you've been asked to walk a fine line as well in regards to this and how you talk about the further questions you've raised.
Yeah, so I'm a member of the Audit Committee at Tower Hamlets Council, and the Audit Committee is responsible for fraud and fraud prevention. I'm also a member of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is again responsible for looking at the actions of the administration as a whole, officers as well as the mayor. So one of the reasons why I did attend many days of the trial is because I thought it would be a good view into some of the details of how the council operates that I ordinarily wouldn't learn about or wouldn't be told about. So I thought it would be very interesting, and it was. And one of the things I told the audit committee, because we actually had a meeting on the Thursday, the day before the not guilty verdicts were announced, I sort of said, this is clearly a major subject for us to discuss in the future, but we can't talk about it tonight because the jury is still out. So what I did say is I'd email them. So I sent them a couple of days ago, audit committee members, the chair of Overview and Scrutiny, and the senior council officers, a very detailed email with 13 points in it, with issues that I thought, not all of them directly for audit, but I thought would be useful for audit. And certainly many of them are either for audit committee or Overview and Scrutiny, and I'll explain what some of them are in a minute. The response from the senior officers is that, well, I won't read out what they sort of said. I think that would be inappropriate. But basically, I'm being told not to discuss it, what I put in that email. And some of it is, it is confidential. Some of it I'm not going to put in the public domain because there was things revealed in public court, and there was public open session, which were very personal to a number of people. And I'm not going to repeat some of that personal detail because I don't think it's appropriate. And frankly, I don't think people need to know some of that detail. But if I kind of go through some of the stuff in the email that I kind of raised, not in any particular order. So, one of the questions was about, Afsana Begum, raised the issue about domestic abuse. She raised it in advance of the trial. So how did we as Tower Hamlets Council respond to that issue? Because obviously we have, various responsibilities, for example, violence against women and young girls. So this is a very difficult situation for us. And as I talked earlier with Peter about one of the things so the third point in the email is about, how do we manage this process internally within the council? Who takes the decisions? I'm assuming it's the chief exec with the support of the legal team, but I don't know. That's just my assumption. It's never been explained to us how we do this. We've never had a scrutiny session looking at this issue. And I do think, and that's, as I said, the third point, that I think we need to have a more general understanding, not this specific case, but just how do we do this? How do we make these decisions? What are the checks and balances? How do we make sure that we're not making mistakes? The second point of my email is a very simple one, is that, the emails were lost due to an IT error, but it raises for me broader issues about how long do we retain emails for? So, if somebody leaves the organization, do we get rid of them the next day, or do we keep them for 6 months or 6 years? I don't know the answer to that, and that might be quite useful to understand, because sometimes emails like that can be very useful in sort of either fraud or employment tribunal cases. The kind of next point was to do with the level of barrister experience that the council employed. The next point was witness training and selection. We had a number of council officers who gave testimony. One of them did an excellent job. She was really good. She was very authentic, and I think the jury sort of really liked what she had to say. But there was another council officer where apparently it went very bad. I missed that morning session, but apparently it was so bad that in the afternoon session where I attended, the judge actually made a joke about a council officer falling apart when they were cross-examined, and that did cause issues for the council. So how do we train our staff? How do we make sure that our council staff who do go to give, witness statements or who go to attend court, what training and support do we give to them? Because that's quite a big responsibility to take on. One of the key issues, and I think this is pretty much in the public domain already, is that certainly at that point in time, there was no policy about how do we define overcrowding. So, if you have a house with 5 rooms in it, how do you interpret those rooms in terms of overcrowding? And apparently we didn't have a policy at that point in time. And apparently within the department, there were differences of opinion about how you interpret the house that she lived in. So the question I'm asking is, do we have an overcrowding policy? And if not, I think we should probably write one. So some of the other points were about whistleblower. So one of the things in our whistleblower policy, it says that if you whistleblow to Tower Hamlets Council, your identity, and I'm reading from the council documents now, your identity will be kept confidential so long as it does not hinder or frustrate any investigation. We will always ask you for consent if we need to disclose your identity. So what happened in this case is the identity of somebody, a member of the public, was revealed to the defence, and that person's name was revealed, mentioned often in court, but Tower Hamlets Council never asked that person's consent to share their name. So I take the view that if you want to whistleblow to Tower Hamlets Council, you probably shouldn't use your real name. You should, I know of at least one other case where somebody did do a report of a fraud case. They created a fake email address and a fake name, and that's how they reported it. And that might be what other people might wish to do as well. There were other issues about, for example, bidding system security. So back in 2013, it was pretty easy to get into the bidding system. I think that has greatly improved over the years, so it's a much more secure system. But again, I'm not entirely sure. I've never seen any detail. One of the issues was about when Osama Begum stopped bidding in let me rephrase that. Somebody stopped bidding in 2014. But it was only a year later that the council started the process of asking whether or not she wanted to start rebidding or not. So one of my questions would be, should we perhaps be doing that more quickly? So if somebody stops bidding on the housing system after 6 months, is that perhaps a clue that their circumstances have changed and perhaps we should check in with them after 6 months? Again, I don't know what that process is. Do we email people or do we only send them letters? And then there's other sensitive points which I won't go into, except for the last point I sort of skipped over was so for me, I actually had to stop myself laughing in court at one point because the defence did a really good job, to be fair, and I think I said this at the last radio show, is they gave a clear impression that councillors sort of had more power in Tower Hamlets, and I thought we had power in Tower Hamlets, especially as regards housing and prosecutions. So, for example, one of the things I sort of was quite interested to find out was that not once did the prosecution ever really talk about the fact that we have an executive mayor in Tower Hamlets, and therefore all executive power rests with Mayor John Biggs. So the impression kind of given, so they talked about the mayor's office because that was relevant to one part of the defence, but they never really explained what that meant. So if you live in London, the reality is that most people live in local authorities where the councillors actually do have power and do form part of the leadership, and that's not the case in Tower Hamlets. But that point was never explained to the jury. So there were a couple of points where I thought the jury didn't fully understand how Tower Hamlets worked, and this is a big irony because it was Tower Hamlets Council who were doing the prosecuting, and they weren't even able to demonstrate to the jury actually how Tower Hamlets worked. And even at one point, the judge actually had to ask, she was getting confused between Tower Hamlets homes, the mayor's office, the lettings team, how do they all connect? So she asked for some clarity on that. And that should have been, that's the first thing the prosecution should have done, is paint a picture of how Tower Hamlets work. So anyway, so that's why I put, a lot more detail on that in the email to the audit committee, and it'll be very interesting to see over the coming months to what extent the audit committee and overview and scrutiny committee and officers are willing to dig into some of the detail of this. Some of this is not directly relevant, and we're probably never ever going to prosecute a member of parliament again. I very much doubt that will ever happen again. So some of this stuff is probably not going to be relevant to future prosecutions, but I think some of it is, and I think there are lessons for us to learn. Whether it's, the lesson could be we should never have prosecuted Osama Begum in the first case. There's definitely evidence for that. Or there's a case that, the prosecution could have done a better job. There's also evidence for that as well. But I think clearly there's lots of lessons. And some of these lessons, like, for example, the security of the bidding system, are kind of not directly related to this case at all. They're just simply good housekeeping practice. So that's what was in the email, and it'd be interesting, as I said, to find out what happens as a result of that email over the coming weeks. So
I think just to pick up on your earlier point, there's a lack of clarity as to what happened, what was the trial about, what were the facts of the trial. So what I find interesting is there's different narratives are out there. So there's one narrative that Councillor Haq, who's the ex-husband of Afsana Begum, he through his scrutiny housing subcommittee basically controlled the entire investigation. Now, Andrew and I know what the power of scrutiny is. It's just a gentle reminder. That's all you can do. Scrutiny. You don't have any power of directions or anything like that. It's 100% executive mayoral model. So the mayor has 100% power. His cabinet are there to assist him and advise him, and the role of councillors is just to remind him. That's all we can do. So the officers do not follow any instructions of any councillors apart from the mayor or any delegated power. So it was kind of interesting that this narrative that there was, the ex-husband was directing this prosecution from July 2019. And it's a very malicious prosecution following what is alleged a troubled marriage. So that's one narrative, and then the other narrative is that this has been a series of cock-ups. Pardon my French. It's just one mistake after another, and it seems to be bungling. And there's another one. There seems to be double standards by the former councillor Shahid Ali, who accused the council of going hard on him and going easy on the MP. The lonely councillor gets a silk and a junior, and the MP gets a junior barrister, and he felt quite aggrieved by that. I know he made a social media comment on various places, and I believe he spoke to you, Andrew, as well, quite irate.
So that's one of the details in my email is actually that question, and I actually name him as the source of that, because again, and I do think, like a lot of things with Tower Hamlets, it's a mixture of different things, and mistakes and errors are a part of it, and some of it is like losing the emails. These things happen, but it didn't help. Actually, didn't help either, because actually it affected the defence and it also affected the prosecution as well. And there were other mistakes and sort of errors made as well, and some of them, it won't be issues for the future, but some of them will be. And I think if we are to learn the lessons, then some of these issues we do need to look at and to rebuild confidence in. About because a lot of people have no confidence in the housing bidding system. They think And I've seen again comments on social media about people sort of saying, well, I've been waiting for 5 years for a 1-bedroom, and why haven't I got anything, and I'm being forced out of Tower Hamlets? And, you know, how do you give those people answers as to actually sort of what happened? So one of the things I'm thinking about is, I think, you know, somebody does need to write something that is sort of reasonably accurate, or at least tries to outline, you know, what the facts are, and then separately kind of put the interpretation in, because right now there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I think in summary, I can see why the council decided to do something, but I think, you know, on reflection, the first charge, you know, I don't think was sustainable. I think the second charge, definitely there was housing fraud. That's undeniable. The difficulty is who committed that housing fraud, and the prosecution clearly didn't prove that was Osama Begum. And then the third charge, I won't. I have to think about what I'm going to say about that one, because it's a difficult one in terms of the overall results. But that's, I think maybe the third charge was probably the strongest of the three. But there are also great difficulties as to how it was presented, and whether or not you could actually prove fraud, because, as I said in the previous radio show, it's actually quite a high bar to achieve. And I'm not sure they well, obviously the jury does, you know, agreed that they didn't reach that bar, and ultimately they're the deciders of this, not me. So.
One thing that I find quite concerning is housing allocation is transfer of a public asset for a social need. Yet what I found fascinating was a lot of it's down to discretion of officers. You know, the discussion that they had, oh, is it overcrowding? Or some officer thinks it's overcrowding. The whole thing is kind of like a mystery, even to us as elected officials, and even to the officers working in the department. There doesn't seem to be any clarity, and that's where the problems come, and that's where the accusations come. That's where the loss of trust is, and we just need to rationalize or systemize or explain things properly in an open, transparent way, which the trial has revealed isn't the case, and we need to do that. We're going to go, we're near the end of this segment. We're going to go straight into a break. After the break, we're going to talk about the Weavers by-election. There's different interpretations as to why it's happened. One of them I saw on social media is because were agitated about the trial, that they all came out en masse and punished the Labour Party, but there's all these other reasons as well. So we're going to go short break, and then we're going to go straight into the Weavers by-election. So join us after the break.